timer as well, which I use.
1 minute, 2 minutes, timer on.
Yeah,
So very useful,
that is quite cool. Yeah.
Timer off.
Well, I was born blind, so I've never known anything else. And I grew up and was brought up to believe that I could do anything. I was brought up never to be a victim, that people didn't owe you more because you were blind than they owed anybody else. I was taught to be independent from an early age, always to look good and to do the best I can and to try whatever I wanted to try. There were obstacles along the way, and I think possibly one of the biggest obstacles is often other people's attitudes, which are either intentionally prejudiced or sometimes unintentionally prejudiced. Being blind also means that while I can probably pretty much do what all my sighted colleagues can do, it often takes a little bit longer to do things. So I do have to work a little bit harder. Often people don't judge one on the same basis as they do sighted people. So when I was a barrister in Cape Town, I had to be on my toes all the time, because if I made a mistake, it wasn't because I was human, but because I was blind. So there's always been this, I've got to continue to prove myself. And while maybe that is not quite so much the case anymore, I think I unintentionally and sort of unconsciously still operate on the basis that I need to prove myself all the time, and that a blind person can do whatever a sighted person can do. I'm Lynita Conradie, and I am presently a minister in the Harrow and Hillingdon circuit, and I will become the superintendent of the circuit in September this year. Obviously, I have to do things slightly differently, so I am a bit more dependent on people for certain things. So I can walk around my surroundings on my own with my white cane. When I need to go to churches which are too far away, I either use a taxi or somebody gives me a lift. I have a computer, just an ordinary laptop. Installed on it is a screen reader, so if I get an email, the computer will read the emails. I then have a scanner, which is an ordinary flatbed scanner, and a software program which enables me to scan a page and the page will then be read out to me. I then also have a braille embosser, which enables me to write my sermons on the computer and then emboss them in braille so that I can take. I'm not confident enough to preach without notes. So braille is a very important part of my way of working. I then also have just recently acquired something which is called a Braille Sense 6, which is essentially a tablet, but it has a Braille keyboard and Braille output, and on that you can do reading documents, composing documents, and you've got all sorts of other facilities. Very often people are very fearful of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, using the wrong words, because we've all become very conscious of language. And I think people just need to be natural and not be afraid to ask questions, because I think if people were to ask questions, then they wouldn't make assumptions. In order for churches to be made accessible, I think people need to gain an understanding of what accessibility means. And my experience has taught me that most people think that accessibility means you must have a ramp, you must have a hearing loop, and you must have bathroom facilities that are suitable for people who have mobility issues. But accessibility is a lot more than that. Accessibility is about helping and interacting. So when a blind person comes to your church, make them feel welcome and possibly guide them around. So accessibility is often very subtle and actually very simple. So there may be some things that churches could do in order to improve accessibility. One of the things that's important is to try and understand what accessibility is. Work out exactly what they need, but maybe you want to ask them rather than just making assumptions. Some disabilities may be hidden. Everyone is different. People who can see a little bit have very different needs from people like me who can't see at all. And it's trying to understand those differences. It's important also to put a face and a name together. So when we talk about accessibility and about accessibility audits, perhaps it's important for you to try and find out in your area who is blind or deaf or uses a wheelchair, who may be prepared to come and talk to your church and talk about what it's like in everyday life. It's all about human relationships, nothing about us without us, so do consult before you make assumptions. You can find a range of resources to help make your church as accessible as possible on the Methodist Church's website. My understanding of the gospel is that Jesus was there for everyone. Yes, it is probably true to some extent that the Bible does portray blindness quite negatively. One's got to be careful that this is not artificial. So in other words, don't do this just because the church said you've got to do it. We're quite good at ticking boxes. And we can say, oh yes, we've done this. Yes, our church is accessible. But actually, when it comes to trying to include people in kind of the everyday life of the church, so don't assume, for example, that a blind person can't be a steward, or can't read the Bible up front, or can't help in the kitchen, or can't help with spring cleaning. Find out what people can do, and that for me is part of the accessibility, is to try and be more open to people who come into your church.